Hi, everybody. I guess I'd call myself more of a ReWilder, although because I'm a master gardener and they didn't like that word, we call it wildscaping here in Kingston. And I've been doing it without knowing what I was doing I think I've been in my place for 28 years and just started by breaking rules. And then over the last 2-3 years, I think I've really been doing a lot more research and thinking and reading about it, and locally more coaching and teaching too. So I've been on a huge learning curve, and I'm sharing with you today a little bit about what I've learned and how I see it now. And this first image, actually, I just took out, there's a woods, I'm in a between a quarter and a third of an acre lot on the edge of Kingston, and it's about a community of about 120,000 people. And the forest that's walking distance from my house, it's got alvar and several different forest ecosystems within it. And this picture here is from the alvar, which is a very rare ecosystem that is on top of limestone. And usually what happens here, there's people that live near alvars and they tend to add soil and try and garden traditionally on it versus trying to understand what an alvar is and appreciate the beauty of things like this. Then that's saxifrage. So I'm talking about layering wildscapes, and layering is, well, starting to, Thomas Rainier, who is one of the people, and I don't know, can you see if I hold up something in front of the camera too? I don't know, can you see that? Yep. Okay, Thomas Rainier, this is a book, like if you buy one book, I really, really recommend this book, and I'm gonna have some scans from this book that I'm sharing. And in one of his online interviews, he says you have to kind of like see like a chipmunk, get right on the ground and see. So see like a chipmunk, be like a bee, fly like a bird. And that's how we're gonna think about layering and wildscaping. This is national parks in Singapore. Singapore actually is now calling themselves a city in a garden. So they're not going quite wild, but they're going wilder over time. And you'll see in their national parks, I don't know, educational material, I guess you'd call it, where they're talking with their citizens, that they have 4 layers there that they are trying to bring into the more, traditional landscaping that has been in their city. Canopy, emergent, shrub, and understory. And, name of the author. And those all matter because you see the insects on there, the birds, they all live in different layers. It's Thomas Rainier is the name of the author. Rainer and Claudia West.
Oh my goodness, I can't see that.
So this is my neighborhood, and you can see it. It's like pretty typically suburban. This is like, Kingston is really behind in terms of stepping outside of big lots. This was my house when I moved into it, and it took an hour and a half to mow, and it had juniper foundation plantings, a lot of grass, and a lot of asphalt. The front yard was 2/3 asphalt, probably, because there's 2 big wings to that asphalt that you can't see. That's my husband sitting in the backyard, which is not a great picture. But when we moved in, he said I can do whatever I want to the backyard, but he wanted a normal front yard. So, normal being what we saw there. So I waited until he was out of town for 2 weeks and started on front yard because I just couldn't get his permission. And now he's like one of the biggest defenders. If anybody messes in the front yard, he goes out and, the snow plow one year knocked some stuff over across the street. And so he went over and have a good talking to, and he gives people tours in the yard now. So he's really come around. And now this is right now what we see as normal, and you guys would all be very familiar with this. You see those mulch circles around the trees and very, very artificial landscaping. This is also seen as normal. You'll see a lot of people, again, doing mulch around a tree and putting in some spaced out plants with a lot of mulch. even this is blue stem, and you'll see a monarch on it. Like little blue stem is a great plant. It's a great native plant, but this is planted normal, like according to our conventional view of how things should be planted. And when I was, for many years, I planted this way too. Here's a plant and let's put it in the ground without thinking about how all the plants really worked together. This is another native plant, but again, you can see they're all kind of clumped into like groups with mulch at the bottom. And this is another neighbor's yard, and you'll see everything's kind of like grass and things just plopped around the yard with some, I don't know, in this case, they have some concrete things to work around and separate them from the lawn. Now, since I've never been a fan of normal or following the rules, I started wildscaping my yard really early on, and the squirrels gave me a lot of help with that because I like to collect black walnuts. There was black walnuts in the neighborhood, and I'd collect them thinking I would crack them. I never got around to it, and then they'd get all kind of kooky and black. So my husband would put them outside, and the squirrels would plant them around the yard. So now this is my yard 10, 15 years ago now. That's the front yard, and you can see there's no asphalt driveway left. There's a piece of just gravel there, and the rest is all gone. Now, it does not look like this at all anymore, and these pictures are a little dark, but I thought I'd show you to them just because yards transition a lot too as you get to know them and as succession starts to happen. So this was like one day, sorry, I've got a cat kind of joining me here. I'm trying to shut things down. So out of my car, you'd go to the left, and that's where the old gravel driveway had been. So I'd go to the left, walking up that path to the house, to the front door. And I love stumps. And so I just collect stumps and leave them around the yard. And this was one stump that was decomposing along the path. And you can see lupins just seeded themselves into it. And most of the stuff in the gravel actually seeded in. Coreopsis just seeded itself all over. And that's catmint, which I did plant that. The daisies come in on their own. They're not a native, but they're naturalized at this point. Now, my front door is right there. You can't see it, but it's right there behind that red triangle. And also at the time, that was my office window. And I like to get up really early, maybe 5:30 in the morning. And one morning I look out my office window, and the next picture is not the picture because I wasn't fast enough. But there was this saw-whet owl sitting on the vine looking at me in the window, which was really, really cool. And for me, that's one of the joys of wildscaping, is how you get to know all these different creatures. Now I share my home, and I like to think of it as a forest being. And I started with a lot of, I guess, perennials of very different sorts. But the trees just seemed to want to come in, and I couldn't cut them down. So now it is a forest, and I've decided I'm someone who lives with forest. Walnut, hickory, oak, maple forest this being is. So that's in winter. I ended up moving the path from where the old driveway was. I've been sitting in my front window, and one of the things when you're thinking about design, which I didn't think about back when we ripped up our driveway, was everyone's heard of curb appeal, and I hate that word. I hate curb appeal. I like to think about it as soul appeal, because it's about what speaks to you, not what speaks to somebody driving by or somebody who might want to buy your house. And so sitting in the house and looking out, I was really annoyed because the car there, I can see from that front living room window, which you see that green big window there. And I said there, how can I hide the car? If I'd taken up the driveway again, I would have done it on the other side. And I realized that those walnuts, there's 3 walnuts right here in between the path, and then I put the path through those walnuts and then build a big hugel mound to hide the car. So that's, one of the ways that it's evolving as the years go by. I found, and this guy is very academic, so it's going to take me a while to read his book, but it's called Think Like a Forest, and that title just spoke to me. And he's an anthropologist that is now starting to study the anthropology of people and the natural world, because in his research, he's realized that he can't understand people without understanding their relationship, in this case, to the forest. And I really like this quote: humans can speak to forests, and forests can speak back. The question is, what does it mean to speak? What does it mean to listen? So that's why this and Robin Wall Kimmerer is why I like to, and that's the cat walking over the keyboard. How does this being see itself in its situation? So rather than a tree, this being. So that's a black walnut. And we all kind of already think about a lot of the gifts that a tree or any plant might offer. I mean, I'm not going to go through these, but they offer so many gifts. And they have behaviors, they have needs, they have attributes. And those are some of the things for design with plants, and think about plants in communities and layers, that it's useful to start kind of understanding. You know, my cat is kind of looking for attention. Some behaviors like late to leaf out, drops leaves after first frost, some needs, protection, deep fertile rich soil, sun. Black walnuts really need sun. They need companions, and that's one of the things that traditional horticulture kind of never really understood. Some attributes, those are just some of its attributes. But I realized after I started reading some of the indigenous writings that I was really missing something. And when I was reading about mycorrhizae, and I don't know how many people here know about mycorrhizae, just curious, I guess we can't do any kind of vote or anything, but mycorrhizae, if you've seen, it's the fungal network, the mycelium that connects from mushroom as its fruiting body, and it connects through the root systems, plants with each other. It doesn't just connect trees, so it connects trees in a forest, but it also connects with other plants. And so plants underground, those root systems, are talking with each other, are sharing information with each other, not talking in our language, but in some sort of communication system that we don't understand. And so from there, it's like, and as I've read more about it, these beings have relationships, thoughts, not our kind of thoughts, but language, spirit, soul, and breath. And spirit, soul, and breath, to me, is a little bit that they want to live just like we want to live. And somehow they see the world around them not the way we do, and we don't really understand it, but just to know it's there, I think matters for us. So for me, layering Wildscapes is about combining traditional ecological knowledge, which is what they're starting to call some indigenous wisdom, with Western scientific knowledge. So it's a little bit of both. And that picture there, that's sweetgrass in the picture. So if you've got wetland, sweetgrass might be a really nice addition. It does spread though. So forest beings live in community, and that's the understory, the forest floor, not my forest floor. Centuries ago, and again, permaculture, I wonder how many people here know about permaculture, but I'm also a permaculture designer. And the more I read about plant communities and traditional ecological knowledge, I'm sitting here like permaculture is just like, they're all related. So centuries ago, many people were designing food forests. Even the Mayans they had a Mayan milpa cycle, which was a food forest, which was, they designed with layers in the Amazon to have a productive food system. And you can see the layers in this picture. And this is a permaculture picture about tall tree, small tree, shrub, herb, ground cover, root, and fungi. So here's a image from Midwest permaculture. So they're a good one to look up, but you'll see how they design what they call a plant guild. And a plant guild is, you can think about it as a layered plant community. So again, very similar knowledge. And the guild is like plants that support and work together with each other. And in permaculture, they're doing it because they're thinking often that would be a fruit tree in the middle. And what does a fruit tree need to thrive? What supporting plants would it need? So nitrogen fixing plant would be one to feed it. And so that's an example of that. And because I love walnuts, that's one of the things that I think, okay, what does a palette of plants look like that works and supports a walnut tree? And that on the top left with echinacea there, and these three, actually that's, yeah, 3 walnuts there. So those are 3 walnuts again, about 7 years ago in my front yard before I put the path through those walnut trees. And what all grows with a walnut? In Toronto, they had a headline one day like, killer walnut, neighbor wouldn't let somebody cut down the killer walnut tree in their yard. And they have a bad reputation because they have dew-blown, which does inhibit certain plants, but there's a ton of things that grow well with walnuts, including fabulous fruits like pawpaw trees, which are only tropical fruit, which I think.
But will I be muted?
Which you can grow pawpaws, I think, probably where you are, because we can grow them up here. So the big shift, Thomas Rainier, the Planting in a Post-Wild World that I showed you, he says the big shift he sees in horticulture is thinking about plants as individual objects to thinking about plants as social networks. So even with native plants, it's a social network. And so what species want to be together, will grow together, how will they play together? And this is from his book, and he's using work done from some Germans around levels of sociability in plants. And you can see plants that are quite happy living in like the odd little plant growing in little groups, staying like independent versus groups, you know, so it's just a upping level of sociability. So level 5 is like plants that really like to spread, basically. And you can see like Canada goldenrod would be level 5. And you say you may not want to put Canada goldenrod because it's such a high level of sociability plant. But others of those are ones that you would, like Carex pennsylvanica. I'm really become a fan of sedges, and the Carex, if you have a woodland floor, it kind of goes around and it weaves all the other plants together. So starting to know in each plant that you're putting into your design, that really helps you understand how they're going to weave together. And I'm not really going to go into this. This is in Rainier's book, which again I recommend. But he's taken it and kind of categorized it a little bit differently to say, what's the strategy of a plant for survival? So remember, plants want to live and reproduce. So how do they want to survive? And I don't know if people know what plant I've got up there. I just took that picture in the forest right by my house a couple of days ago. I've not had any luck with it in my yard, but it's right next door, so I'm going to try again. But that's bloodroot. And bloodroot would be the type 3 strategy of stress avoidance, because it's early flowering, it's coming up when there's a lot of moisture and when the tree's leaves are down. So understanding that about that, and understanding it about that plant helps you to choose where to have it in your landscape and how it might fit with your other plants. Is a hawthorn rose a native plant? I don't know that. And this, you'll see strategy of area coverage. This is Canada goldenrod, you can tell in the back of this meadow. And they all knit together and they aggressively expand. And so those are ones. Actually, that's the area expansion, type 6. This one This one is brown-eyed Susan. And I don't know how many people know that that is a native plant. It's a biannual, so at every second year it dies, but it seeds itself quite assertively. And I love, this is one of my favorite plants because it pops up in the sun, it pops up in the shade, it just seems to pop up everywhere, and it blooms for a really, really long time. And that's another strategy that they use where they type 8 gap occupation. So having plants that pop up all over the place and fill in gaps, that's another plant strategy that helps you think, okay, and cardinal flower is another one of them. You can't count on them to stay, but you may count on them to potentially pop up in different spots over time. And it keeps your landscape like really living, your design. Another book I recommend, and that one in North America, it's got a different cover. And I actually like that UK cover better, Evolving Landscapes versus Garden Revolution. And that's a little bit more about the why, but that's his yard. And he hasn't really done much in terms of designing his yard in a traditional way. That's a moss lawn. And you can see he has trees in different layers, but there's just something that feels soothing about it. In the way that, and I think it's the layers that kind of come together. This is my yard again. Roy Diblick, and I'll talk a little bit more about him, but if there's a second book to get, the No Maintenance, KNOW. He really simplifies. Yes, I can put together the bibliography. I might be able to share the slides. Roy Diblick, he's put together a proven set of plans that he thinks work really well together. But I love this quote, one plant is just a single note. And when I was early on, I would like go to the garden center, like there's a really cool plant and stick it in the ground and, you know, just one or two, because that's all I could afford, versus thinking about how the plants work together, who they like to live with, and having a whole bunch in the same plant. Here's a quote this is from Roy Diblick, and he was just talking about, I think it was from him, sometimes you just feel that something feels off about a space that you're in. And for me, seeing this picture, it just feels off. And why does it feel that way? And I think it's because in this case, everything is just about at the same level. There's no, you can't really read the design. It's just competing. Everything competes together. There's no legibility. This is kind of a screen, just a, I don't know, one-page table I put together for, because we're starting to do some things with schools, workshops here in town about how you might cultivate a plant community and thinking about canopies, walls, understory shrubs, living mulches, carpeting the ground, roots and tubers, but also some of the design elements on the right-hand side, the gifts that they can have, life expectancies and diverse edibles. So again, if I share these slides and you can have that, the invasive years. And so let's say I was starting with this yard. If you're starting with a yard, it's like, what is there that you can work from? And usually it's the structure. And that's Thomas Rainer, that's how he says it. He looks at the existing site and suburban lawn with scattered trees. In this case, there's no busy road, but I'd start with those, there is a tree there. And how would you turn that into a layered landscape to really bring, and this came up when I was Googling curb appeal, and for me, it's got no curb appeal because the landscaping is I don't know. It doesn't breathe. It's not wild. So you first look for structure. So what are the structural elements there? Second, are there any moments that you have in your yard right now or that you see out nearby that you just love? And this is my yard, and that's fringe tree, which is really a shrub, but it will eventually get about 12 feet tall. I think my oldest one is 12 feet tall now. And it's native to more south than my area. Maybe your area has it native. and I just adore this shrub. It's like maybe my top shrub. And looking for moments that knock your socks off. And I love the way the peonies bloom at the same time as it does, and the contrast between them. And my husband always takes like 300 pictures when the peonies are out with that. And then so I like, okay, so I love that fringe tree. I have a forest. So what am I going to do? I'm going to repeat that fringe tree around the yard. Replace mulch with a layered plant community. So this, they've got the basis here, they've got some structural blue stem. And when we talk structure, sometimes you're starting with a forest or a tree, so you've got a forest or a woodland, but sometimes if you're doing a meadow, your structure starts with the most structural of your meadow plants. And it could be a grass. Some grasses are very structural, but often it's a perennial. And Nigel Dunnett, another author that I really like, he says layers are a lot more like a sieve or a slab of cartoon cheese full of holes. A series of eruptions or localized uprising is a better way of thinking about it rather than a uniform homogenized layer. You see there's a whole tapestry, or they call it a matrix of grass here. And then the butterfly weed pops up through that. So it erupts through that. You don't have a bunch of butterfly weed all in a clump, and rather you have it erupting out of a matrix of grass. So this image is available on the web too, planting. So that's Thomas Rainier again. And you can see in that diagram on the left, the structural layer, either a tree, a shrub, or that's Joe Pye weed on the left, a perennial if you're doing a meadow, a big structural perennial that has interest all year. So Joe Pye weed has those seed heads stay all winter, so it's beautiful even when it's dead. Seasonal theme layer are those things that you want to pop out and erupt through during different times in the season to bring that color and different structures through in the season. So they can be structural as well, but they're not like the main structure. And then the ground cover layer. So that you don't necessarily notice the ground cover layer, but that's really important. And that eliminates the mulch. You don't have mulch in this kind of landscape. So design layers, he calls those the seasonal theme and the structure, he calls those design layers, and the ones below functional. And you'll see the roots as well. And oops, where did I go? You'll see how he's got the roots as well. All these root systems are different. And so there's often concern about competition, but often it's actually companionship because they have such different root systems. So there's the Joe Pye weed one, and you see the different root systems there, the shallower and the deeper drilling down. So the architectural layer, that creates structure. Switchgrass, rattlesnake master, Joe Pye weed are some examples. And that's a small percent of the plants that you would plant, 10 to 15%. It's his recommendation. Culver's root is one I love, and that one you can see is extremely structural. But you wouldn't want a whole field of it. It pops out through other stuff. This one I took in the forest near my house, and that one would be a structural, that would be what I do in my understory I don't have right now. But in wandering the woods, I'm sitting there thinking like fall, that color in the fall as a theme color is just so gorgeous. And then it's got berries. So that's going to be integrated into my forest garden, right? Stole some berries and stuck them in the ground and hope they'll grow. Plants that die elegantly. So I mentioned that a minute ago, but when you're thinking the structural and not necessarily all of that functional layer, but you're not just thinking about what it looks like when it's alive, but what does it look like over winter? My garden in the winter actually, and I don't know if I have too many, maybe one picture in the winter, but I love my garden in the winter. And the only time I don't love it is March, I think. This is a workshop we had last fall, and that's just the creek near my house. And there was someone, and this is the matrix, and I'll talk a little bit more about the matrix kind of design method of doing a plant community, but you see those big black pots, and this is really a fun way to do it. And very few of us actually do much design on paper or have those landscape things, and they don't tend to support this style of design anyway. So you take a bunch of great big black pots, and those are your structural plants, and you try playing with where they are. And then you have your functional layers with different colors around. And then in between, you know what your kind of ground cover layer was going to look like. And everyone finds this a really easy way to sit there and play with the design. That's the functional one. So functional one is moments that from the seasonal theme layer that erupt out, and 25 to 40% is what his recommendation on that is. And this is Pearly Everlasting. And I was on a canoe, just a day canoe, and saw this one and I thought, oh, that's gorgeous. It won't go in my garden. But if you have a dry area, that one, those seed heads stay all winter as well. So it would be a gorgeous kind of theme. It lasts for a long time, and then winter it would have fabulous structure all winter. So that's what you're thinking about when you're thinking about those functional layers. So the seasonal theme layer, you think about that structural layer as anchors. Then these other ones are satellites, and they kind of attract around, they kind of orbit around those main anchor ones. And then ground covers. So carpeting the floor with living mulch. You don't find too much either bare soil or mulch in the wild. And with conventional landscaping, we've really gotten used to mulch, but that's something to really move away from. Rainier, I think when he's doing a planting, he does use mulch to start with, and the early, first year of the planting until the plants start weaving together. Roy Diblick, the no maintenance fellow, he won't even put mulch in then. He just no mulch at all. He says that it slows down the establishment of those perennials that you want to weave together. So living mulch spreads quickly. Carex, that's the sedge, Glandularia, canadensis, and Pachyera obovata. Someone mentioned invasives. Some of these ground cover ones are really good if you have them established. They can help keep out the invasives. And there's a woman with a book called The Rambunctious Garden. I don't remember the name of the woman. And she had a blog post on, I think, roundleaf ragwort. I think this is called the common name. And that she was like, oh, this is a bit of an aggressive plant. It's a native aggressive plant, though. And it outcompeted the garlic mustard. So for her, it's like, this is a complete win because you also want it to cover the ground. And you can still have the structural plants erupting out over top of this. Wild ginger. Wild ginger is another one that's supposed to, once it's there, should keep out garlic mustard. If you've got the garlic mustard already, you would still have to get rid of it before the garlic ginger because it won't outcompete it to establish it. But again, having your ground covered with plants that the ground cover layer that have very dense root systems, that's what will keep out invasives from coming back in once you get rid of them. Foam flower, and that's not the foam flower you usually find in nurseries, which I just realized. I keep reading that that's a really spready plant, but most of what the nurseries sell is like a little clump plant. So it's not going to kind of run around and spread. The stuff that you find out in the woods, and I found it in the woods near my house, that's the one that spreads. And so that's the one I want to get established now in my yard. Fillers, and I mentioned the brown-eyed Susan early on. Those are the ones that fill in the gaps. They kind of jump in and pop into all those little spots. And here you can't really tell where the cardinal weed because it's those little spiky things that have died back. But that's one of the ones that kind of come in between everything else. So how do you go about figuring out how to design that? And this is, and I forget the name, but we'll find out in a sec of whose image this is, but they really work from this method in their designs, and you can see it in here. You see on the ground cover layer, they've got all those grasses and sedges. That weaves everything together, and then out of it is erupting different blooming plants. That's the functional theme layer. And then they've got some Joe Pye weed there on the right. So traditional planting plan is on your left, and use the swaths, and that used to be like do a mass planting in the swath. On the right hand side is the designed plant community, and those bigger circles are the structural plants, which could be shrubs, could be like structural perennials like Baptisia or the Joe Pye weed. And again, you could use pots to sit there. So it's like so much easier to work with this method of designing, I think, because you move the pots or on a piece of paper, you move the circles around. And you can see in the bottom the legend, the structural, the seasonal theme, the fillers, and then the ground covers. And you need a lot of ground cover plants. And that's something traditionally that we ignore in the mass planting plan, is just those species. For the ground, if you get down like a chipmunk and look down, there'll be a lot of bare ground, which leaves a lot of room for weeds and invasives to come in. And here's an example from Claudia West, who worked with Thomas Rainier on that book, where traditionally the green infrastructures, and I know in Kingston they did one and they're like, oh, this doesn't work. And they did it like the one on the left. They did not do it with a designed plant community like the one on the right, where it's not mulch and gravel, which is really hard to maintain and keep weed free, but plants that kind of weave together and keep out weeds. And once you design one of like those little modules, then you can just plug them all together and you repeat it. Or you can have more than one design and then you weave those together with some repetition. So you can do one module that you just do the whole thing through your whole yard, or do several depending on if you've got different ecosystems. And if you really want it readable, then you have fewer species in the mix. If you're not so worried about how people perceive it and want to maximize biodiversity, then you have more species in the mix. And this is just mostly sedge you'll see here. That's the Pennsylvania sedge, which is a wonderful sedge that I'm spreading around the yard with several other kinds. And this is Roy Diblick, that he's got a nursery, and you'll see his signs. You can't really read his signs, but he puts, and boy, I wish we had more nurseries like this. He puts all the plants that kind of support each other in a plant community together in his nursery with signs about how they work together, which makes it really, really easy if you were to be going and doing a pollinator garden, for example, to sit there and say, here's everything I need for this garden. And this is just shots that somebody took from his yard, and you'll see the alliums kind of popping up, and you'll see, I think that's a sedge carrot mousse, I forget the name of it, in the middle there. And a lot of that sedge layer you can't really tell is there, but it's weaving everything together. And he says intimacy is good, which means you plant a lot more densely than you do in a conventional, those conventional swaths that you saw earlier on. And bulbs, you think about bulbs the same way as the other plants. They are a layer, and in all of the designs in this new method, bulbs are one of those layers that in that matrix, you'll have clumps of bulbs that you'll plant down, and alliums are one of my favorites, and it seems to be one of the favorites of these designers as well. And another one that is a native one that you guys would have and that we have here that's just blooming now is the trout lily. I love the trout lily, and it's just popping up yellow everywhere right now. So that's a grouping of plants by sociability. So there's foam flower, and you can see this foam flower is spreading, which is what it's supposed to do. And so that's a very spready, sociable plant. And less sociable, but still pretty sociable, is the wild ginger and trilliums. And then a few ferns, which are more independent, and they kind of pop out here and there, and they're level 1. So that one doesn't have like really tall plants, but they're still, especially the ferns, still provide some structure. So you can think about this no matter what height of planting you're thinking about. And I think that's Roy Diblick that says this, but 5 to 7 plants. So if you really want it to look very tidy and very designed, then you minimize, and it's really hard to resist, but keep it down to 5 to 7 plants. And that's including sedges and low grasses. Or for really diversity, a tall mix, and you go taller. So shorter looks more designed, taller, less design, and the layers mingle together a lot more, and it looks wilder and more messy. And so that's like a personal choice, and how friendly your neighbors are potentially too. So the one on the left, I would say that's the design that even cranky bylaw officers would like. And the one on the right, there may be ones that may still try and report you for it. Here in Kingston, they might. And that is from Roy Diblick's book. That's one of, you see how he's just got a grid, and that's the design. So the designs in his book are matrix designs that he says is proven, that he's proven to work and over time thrive when they knit together. And it's not like some plants will outcompete the rest. It will kind of slowly evolve and change, but it plays really well together. And that's from his website. That's 16 together that he really likes. So again, if you want things, and a lot, and all of these authors actually, they're not completely wild. Thomas Rainier was planting in a post-wild world. They will use some cultivars of the native plants. So still, they emphasize native a lot more, but they'll also use companionable exotics is what they call, like friendly plants from elsewhere that aren't bugs. And I think in urban gardens, that's really something to consider. Some of those are really good for wildlife as well. So which ones and what percent? I tend to emphasize a much higher percent of native, but I do have the companionable exotics. So there's that, chipmunk point of view. You have to really get down and see where all the gaps are. And if you've got a lot of gaps, that means you need a lot more ground cover there. And I just put this up here because I think it's really neat. Tectonic Safari, they've done a bunch of designs where you can see they've got pallets for acidic hickory forests. And these are designs that they're thinking would be neat within cities in public places. And they have all the layers within these designs. So here's a boulevard planting, and you'll see the wet to pressed hot community. They have the canopy understory, shrub grass perennial layer. What they are missing in this one would be the ground cover layer. So they would still need for this to really be resistant to weeds and to really tie together. They still need that ground cover layer. Mini meadows and boulevards. I was really impressed to see City of Toronto has this in there. I don't know if they've actually done any yet, but this is something I'm lobbying our city to do. And Russell Sage, I wouldn't like their rattlesnake master is a native. The alliums I would still add because I really love the alliums. Russell Sage, not so sure. This is a fellow Modern Gardens. I think A New Garden Ethic is his book, and it's a really good book to read. And he's got, he has a drone picture of his yard, and he's in a subdivision like mine, and he's gone like full prairie. And this is his planting plan on the left. And you can see he just did a grid and started plopping in the plants on that grid that he would weave together. Green Abundance by Design, that's a website that's worth looking up because they have done some designs, and this is one of theirs for urban meadow. So they use this method, and you can see down in the middle, all the little green stuff, that would be their ground cover matrix layer, the grasses there. I think they showed some of them on the left there. So here is one of their designs, and you can see again those green circles through tying together. And you see the repeating, so the reds, they repeat. One of the things that we learned during the workshop that they're not quite doing is like having a dot of red that would lead your eye potentially, like in a natural meadow, you would have like, you might have clumps because the clumps kind of hang out in a certain soil conditions, but you may have a plant appear partway through to the next clump. And so in this one, I might kind of wonder about adding like one or two in transition to lead the eye to that next clump. And this, so that one of the reasons that site is really worth looking up is because they have this chart. And this chart, they have so much information about plants that is not available. And I haven't found anybody yet who has a planting chart that has all the information that you need to make decisions about, like, how do the roots in this plant grow? What's its winter structure like? So you really do have to get to know the plants, but there are some charts that take you a little further along the way. So this one I really like. Okay, it's got habitats there. You can see in the middle, and you can see it's got architecture as one of their columns. And so those two columns are really useful in making those decisions. And a lot of the plants here will be plants that you guys are native as well. And then these are just some of their designs, just so you can see how they come together. See those grasses in the matrix layer? And now just to emphasize, I only discovered this a couple of years ago, so I'm really working at filling in all my matrix grassy sedge layers below my other plants to get this effect. Now this one is Nigel Dunnett, who is one of the famous ones. I don't particularly like this one. I find it a little too, I don't know. But depending on your taste in plant colors, like this, for some people, like this really pops. And so from more conventional of a lot of color in the landscape, and you can see those repeating foam flowers and other things popping through. This is in Sheffield, where Nigel Dunnett's university is. And you can see he experiments all through the city, which is just so awesome. And see the seed heads? Like there's a lot of dead plants there. The alliums are done, they're blooming, and so are the red hot pokers. And so how do they die? And I love my alliums for a month, 2 months, 3 months after they're dead. That structure, that shape is there. And there's the alliums in bloom, and that's a June shot. There's the one where it's like, I think that's the prairie dropseed, which is a great grass for a meadow garden. That's a lower meadow. This one's still early in the year. Some of those will get very tall. And the structure, the themes will keep changing throughout the season. So this will look completely different in the fall. There's Sheffield again, and you can see they have a little bit of a forest there. So a question to think about, and it's back to, you know, at the very beginning I had that Alvar. What natural plant communities are near you? And study them and see what jumps out at you, what do you see there, and how are they growing? So there's things right now that I've been noticing as I go on my walks in the woods every day, and the Dutchman's breeches are all blooming right now, and they're all on an east-facing slope, which gets a bit of sun. And I'm sitting there, so if I plant them in the yard, maybe I need to do that. And boy, do they ever look good with all the trout lilies right now. And the emerging, what's it called? I'm blanking on the name, but so study how they work together. So this is, you see my yarn at the, that's my yarn at the top right. That little red dot is my house. And over here with all those green things, that's the forest, which is private land that there's a developer wants to develop, but we're going to try and get that stopped because it's such an awesome forest with huge old trees and very different ecosystems within it, including the albar, which is very rare. And I've started mapping it. So all those green things, almost all of those are my little green iNaturalist mappings. And if you're not using iNaturalist now, I would really recommend it because you can like start taking pictures of things and or going out and hunting for, you look on iNaturalist and see what's nearby that somebody found. My husband ran across the guy crawling on the forest floor, and he's like, my husband said, what are you doing? He goes, I'm looking for a sedge. Somebody posted it on iNaturalist. And it was sedge I had taken a picture of and put up. And so that's my black walnut there. And that sedge, I have to ID this year. I haven't ID'd it yet, but it came in all on its own. And that sedge stays green all year. It stays green in the winter, except the rabbits tend to eat it down. It stays green in the summer. It stays green in the drought. And it's just a great companion. And so now that's one of the reasons I'm doing more sedge. And another thing I'm doing is like, I ran a guide down from more southern Ontario. So I'm going to be off once we're allowed to travel again and explore a walnut savanna, which is Clear Creek Forest, to learn from that. The Virginia waterleaf, that was the other one I was trying to think of. I've got quite a bit of Virginia waterleaf in my yard. That's a native plant that really covers a forest floor really well. The bees like it when it's blooming. You can eat it in spring. If it's really dry, it will die back in the summer, but then it will come back in the fall. So it's a ground cover I love. And that's the rye, the wild rye, which I hadn't known about, so I have to investigate. So I want to go down and see what a walnut savanna looks like. And he found another one near Myth River, which is again southern Ontario, and that's got a completely different forest community. Wild ginger, toothwort, zigzag goldenrod, common blue violet, all of those plants, except for running strawberry vine, are in the forest near my house. So I've gotten to see how awesome they look together. And now it's like, how do I build this into the design of my bottom layer? And oh, there's a meadow that I want to go explore that's also in Ontario. So find out where some of these natural sites are and go explore it and explore anything close by with them. And this one, this is, what is it, Canada Milk Vetch. There's someone that I know, she's doing a meadow, a wet meadow garden. So I've been researching plants for her, and we're trying to figure out like the best plant community to start with. And she's going to have persimmon and pawpaw as well. And they're both wonderful edible small trees. And we were thinking what nitrogen fixer would go with them to help feed those trees. And Canada Milk Vetch, this isn't like the most beautiful picture of it, but now I'm like, oh, we really need to find some Canada Milk Vetch. And so we're going to get some of that to feed nitrogen, but also to weave together with the other plants. So Pete Udolph, he's one of maybe he's considered the person who founded the naturalistic or new perennial planting movement. He thinks the future of planting design is about succession. And by succession, he means how does your design, how does that plant community evolve over time? And by knowing those plants, you have a much better sense about how it evolves over time. And the reason I put that picture up there, that's the very edge of my yard. I've got bugleweed in there. That is one of my ground cover layers, which is not a native, but I do like the way it covers the ground. It gets beautiful purple flowers in the spring. I think you can eat the leaves, but I've never tasted them. And that's my neighbor's yard, who I haven't convinced to allow me to plant in anything there yet. But his lawn, that's like a really wet low spot, which his grass doesn't really grow. So the bugleweed's gone in there, the woodland strawberry's gone in there, there's dandelions in there. And there's a whole bunch of stuff from my yard that's kind of popped up in there. And so that's like, because that grass is not healthy, one of those running ground covers that will take in and go in there, and that stays green now and colorful, and it attracts insects. So that's a different type of succession. And the other thing I'm pointing you to is Prairie Moon Nursery. I don't know if you've seen they have something they call a cultural guide. And something I like in the cultural guide there is on the comment section on the really right, I highlighted a bunch of the goldenrods. And in the forest, this is where I learned about I didn't know there was forest goldenrods that bloomed in the shade, but zigzag goldenrod, I've propagated some for my yard, and that blooms late fall in really heavy shade. And it just, then you have this swath of yellow throughout the forest floor in the fall. So you don't just have that spring show, you have a great fall show. But you'll see in the comments, the aggressive and rhizomatous, however you say that word. And that's like, maybe you watch out for that one. The Canada goldenrod, they don't have them on this because it's so aggressive. And the late goldenrod would be another one that you would reconsider because of that. So again, that type of chart helps you make decisions. And just ending with this quote, there's, she unfortunately has died, so I can't take a workshop from her, but she calls it a Goethean way of seeing, where you're trying to see from the plant's point of view. And there's a gardening quote I love about, all your gardening mistakes were happened before you start to see things from the plant's point of view. And the very act of meeting another being on such a deep level is often a shocking experience, often something akin to falling in love. One can never forget it. And she's talking about plants there. And I think that's like becoming wildscapers, rewilders. That's the joy that we get to have. That's the picture that they took of me from the website. But that's my email address up there. And then I'm Rita Thousand Island Master Gardeners. We're building up wildscaping resources there. And Lakeside Community Garden, we're doing a permaculture orchard and a nut forest. And I have a website, which I haven't really done anything with, but I do send out a monthly newsletter, which is not so much about plants, but it's more about rewilding and all the aspects of what you could call rewilding. So that's it. Questions?
That was beautiful, Joyce. That was wonderful. When are you moving to Port Washington?
I have to say, I'm so happy to be Canadian these days.
I'm sorry about that.
When are you guys moving up to Canada?
Yeah, very likely that'll happen. Hilda and I will start to.
Can we unmute? Because I can't seem to work the chat for some reason.
Please go ahead.
Unmute. I
Go
can't
ahead. Yeah, we can hear you, Peggy. Please go ahead.
Okay, but there's a book by Douglas Tallamay, Bringing Nature Home. You know it?
Yeah.
Okay, so he's very interested, and so am I, in plants that, some plants are better than others in supporting wildlife.
Yeah.
So I like to consider those. Like, for instance, you didn't have any pictures of aster, and that's one of the best plants.
Yeah, I actually have like a big swath of aster and goldenrod in my front yard.
Those are his
Fireworks,
two favorite
goldenrod.
perennials. Those are his two favorite perennials. So I mean,
Yeah, I love the goldenrod, and the fireworks is, it's not an, it's a cultivar of a native goldenrod, and it spreads nicely. So it's like on the higher end of sociable, but a very nice sociable. And the aster just came in and joined it all on its own, and the purple with the yellow late summer, I just adore that.
But so that's something I try to do, to pick. Some plants are better than others. It's not just what they look like and their structure, and it's also, some plants are better than others. Like redbud is a beautiful tree, but there are better small trees like dogwood that are, according to Douglas Tallamay, they support
like the ones,
insects.
Yeah, the ones that I tend to have, I have a red bud, and the red bud is good if you're doing, well, if you like the spring bloom, but it's also good in a food forest because it's a nitrogen fixer that feeds a fruit tree.
Oh, okay.
So when you're looking at, I think there's multiple things to think about when making a decision about the plant. And if you're doing like supporting a fruit tree and trying to feed other trees, it's got a purpose there. And when I did the walnuts at the very beginning and all the gifts that a plant has, that's a way to think about it. And here, you'll see they have like, here are the bees, the ones that really support the bees better. So that is always one. I always think about bees and pollinators. I always think about birds as well.
Okay.
So I have a lot of pagoda dogwood in my yard. And the birds, that's just one in the backyard. The berries don't even get ripe. So I love it because it's got beautiful bloom, and I love it because it's got berries. So, it's got multiple gifts to it.
Well, his thing is, how many insects does it support? Because the birds eat the insects, and then insects are important.
Yes, the birds eat the insects. That's right.
That's how he rates them. That's how he rates plants.
Yeah, I think you have to combine everything together, though. And he says that only native plants and that there's a big difference. Nigel Dunnett in their studies in UK actually disagrees with him and says there are a lot of companionable exotics that are just as beneficial. So I think
changed, by the way, a little. He has a new book. He has a new book that has non-natives. His last two books.
Yeah, because we live in a changing, like in Kingston here, in the Carolinian forest, we have to help it migrate because of climate change, which means in the end, our plant communities are going to change and our insect populations as well. I do like oak. I always will recommend oak because and the willows. So yes, the insect that really support it. Oh, turn off the white screen. I will. I'll just stop sharing actually.
I like that screen. All right.
Yeah, so I agree the insects are really important, and the birds that the insects for the birds to eat as well. Sorry, Renju.
I'm sorry. I was just saying a couple of people had questions, so maybe just put down a question. So Mindy, why don't you turn off? Go ahead, please, Mindy, if you want to ask your question, and then just put it in the chat, and then we can take turns asking questions. Go ahead, Mindy?
I grow plants on Long Island through a nonprofit, Quality Parks. And I started with growing the plants and selling, and then I realized that the yard has to not look so weedy. I actually had the village yell at me because I was just letting the weeds grow because I was so busy with the growing plants.
Yeah.
So I've put in plants, and I think a lot of people in this area, besides the tick issue, there's also the deer browse. That's the #1 question. Is this plant deer resistant? So I was wondering if you had also a story to tell about deer browse.
Not really. I'm lucky I don't have to deal with deer. You'll see that on that chart that's from Prairie Moon, they do list the ones that are deer resistant bare. And really, I think you got to plant the deer resistant ones. The other thing I've read about deer, and I haven't tried it myself, is that if you're in a bigger area, plant a decoy hedge. And on the decoy hedge, you put like really yummy stuff for the deer on the outside of it and have it so that it channels them. And then once they did their browse, they can leave versus actually come in and eat all the stuff that you want. So that's one strategy I've read.
I've actually noticed that because last year they started eating rhododendron because it was so cold and there was nothing to eat.
Right.
And now they're actually eating that more than the other plants so far, which is fine, which is like, that is a decoy plant. I don't mind it.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a good idea. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so we are at 7:55 now, and everybody has been patient just because, Joyce, your presentation was so spectacular. I could keep watching plant pictures for another 30 minutes, which is, I'm sure a lot of people here feel the same. We just love this stuff. But we do have, I don't know if Marv is still on. Marv, are you still on, or did we lose Marv? Oh, we lost Marv. Okay, so we'll have Marvin Plantero next time maybe to kick off. That should not be a problem. And I'll send that information around. So maybe Joyce, you could send the bibliography and the deck and anything you can share, like the resources and the URLs to us. We'll circulate that on the lists. This recording will be on as well. I will send out a link. So if anybody wants to look at the pictures again or have a friend who wants to listen to the whole thing over, please do that. Any parting thoughts from you, Joyce? Any parting questions from the audience? Anything else?
I guess maybe just emphasize that like all the gifts, everything about a plant. And so the question that had come in about the insects, always think about and that's when I started, like, think about the birds, think about the bees, think about the other plants, like everything together. That's it, I guess.
Okay, so thank you very much, Joyce, and really appreciate having you on. Stay safe, everybody, and look forward to seeing you all in either a plant sale or one of our activities soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. It was awesome.
Thank you, Raju.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hildur, if we go to Canada, we know where to go.
Yeah, you do have to come visit.
I have a question about the invasives. Like, what's the best way to fight the invasives? Just like a parting question, if anybody is
What
still...
kind of invasives do you have?
Well, we have on Long Island, you name it. We can't tame it. There is so much. There's garlic mustard. There's Japanese Japanese knotweed. There is, yeah. There's just so much coming in. Even Norway maple. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times invasives come in because there's a disturbance.
Yeah, there's a deep disturbance.
Colonized from a disturbance. And it's really, I don't think there's any easy answer to that. You have to try and, like, for most of the invasives, you have to really work to get rid of them and then plant those plants that will compete with it.
So what would be a good native competitor, so to speak?
Well, that rambunctious garden woman said that round leaf ragwort did outcompete the garlic mustard. So that would be one I would try with garlic mustard. The ginger, though, it will keep it out, but it won't outcompete it. So you've got to get rid of the garlic mustard. So a lot of times I think it's just, you have to get rid of it. And then to keep it out, keeping the ground covered.
So
Don't let
Mindy,
that
I know
happen.
Mindy Block. Are you still on, Mindy?
Yes.
Do you wanna?
Yes.
Yeah. Let's actually, if you have some juice left, I know you've really given your best, Joyce. I really appreciate what you've been sharing with us. I really wanna. That's my biggest enemy, so to speak, the invasives.
Right.
In terms of just both private and public land at the Science Museum of Long Island, we're working on trying to create healthy grounds in an environment that's just ridden with invasives. So would you be willing to give us the name? I didn't catch that, and I think Mindy agrees with me in terms of like what we could do to fight the particulars.
I mean, that's a whole topic on its own, and I'm not as much.
Perhaps we should host another seminar about that.
There's Julie Sullivan has Go Native Long Island, her website, and she also got me into planting native aggressives.
Yeah, native aggressives really do, because you want to cover the ground, and native aggressives are really helpful for doing that quickly and competing. And so that would be really that. And remember the sociability of plants, and there's really very sociable ones. And on that Prairie Moon Nursery list, you saw some of the ones that are really aggressive. Those are some that you would want to compete, and then you'll get a simpler design in the end because they're so competitive, but they may outcompete the invasives at that point.
Yeah, I think we're at that point over here because we can try to eradicate, but I don't like chemical intervention at all. So we are doing our best in removing like early detection, fast removal, but some places are just overwhelming to even enter.
Yeah, I'm wondering, like we have someone who is in the Master Gardeners group who invasives are probably one of her most passionate topics. And she would be a much better one because she's also finding them in her property too to talk about this. I do have some links though that I found that I think are really useful in terms of certain plants and how they compete. So I could share those if you give me your email address.
I had an idea. I don't know if you'd be willing to subscribe to that idea, but would you be willing to write a short blog with resources, including bibliography for our ReWild Long Island website?
On invasives?
On just the general topic of tonight, you had a lot of interesting bibliography that our members would like to revisit those books. They didn't catch the title or the author. So and then include just some sites or some type of how to get started with invasives out here.
Sure, I can do that. Yeah.
And it would actually be an honor for our site to have you on. So we have a we have a part of our website.
Go ahead, Valerie.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, so how we start our gardens is we put mulch down, and sometimes there's plug plants. So I'm assuming that like in a few years, the mulch will turn into soil again. And then that's when we'll put down the ground cover. Because I don't think we can put the ground cover on the mulch. I think it needs to be ground.
You would need to drill holes through the mulch to put the ground. Like you really probably want the ground cover in too as well. Like if it's all grass, then you might wait for 4 months for the grass to die underneath that. But you still want to get the ground cover in sooner rather than later. So then it can. And one thing you can do is just move the mulch kind of further out. If you're doing a big area, you can't really, but if it's the smaller area, you can move the mulch further out to give the plant room to spread out.
And it'll grow like on top of the mulch as it's spreading around.
So, see, that's the problem with mulch, is that it does slow down the spread of the plants.
Right.
Which is why they also will plant them a lot more densely if they're trying to cover an area. That gets it faster before the weeds come in.
Yeah, you're right, Joyce. I mean, mulch does slow down the spread, but on the other hand, many of us are sort of like beginner native plant gardeners, so we don't know how the plant looks like when it comes up. We don't know the weed from the plant, so it kind of like makes it easier for us to learn, like get through that, you know, sort of like the first grade, second grade, fourth grade, fifth grade before we do like college.
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, I recommend mulch here too. So I do tell people to mulch, because especially if they're doing a whole yard, you just can't plant the whole thing at once. So you do mulch.
Yeah.
And then put your structural plants in. That would be the priority, is get the structural plants in, because something like the baptisia, I'm trying to think. Some plants, I just remember the Latin name.
It's blue indigo, baptisia, yeah.
Yeah. So that one, it takes a while to get up to its nice structural size. So you want those ones in as soon as possible.
Okay.
And then the ones that spread fast, those can go in later. The smaller, like the sedges, you could add them after once, but the structural ones are definitely, you want those in as soon as you can.
And like the mulch will die away in a few years?
Yeah, the mulch kind of decomposes and it makes the soil, like the wood chip mulch is like fantastic for improving the soil. Although you don't always want to improve the soil. If you're going for a meadow, then you want poor soil. So it's kind of a trade-off. The mulch can improve the soil, in which case the solarization might be better, but.
Okay.
I think here on Long Island, we're really met with an incredible wasteland of lawns that are pesticide and fertilizer ridden lawns. So I think on that note, here at ReWild Long Island, we've taken to just recommending, you know, paper and mulch just to kill the lawn.
Yeah.
But it's a way to replenish the topsoil. I think the latest data I looked at was 24 billion tons of topsoils depleted annually.
Wow. Yeah.
Worldwide. So that's like a couple of tons of topsoil are lost on us every year, each person.
Yeah.
And so any which way we can replenish the topsoil, I think that brings us back to composting or responsible caretaking of the land. And here we are in like the heart of lawn culture. So you are a very welcome guest in our community as we march on towards sustainability. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And really appreciate everybody staying on. And I'll send the links and links I get from Joyce as well as the recording over. Thanks everybody. Good night and stay safe.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Raj. Thanks, Joyce. Bye.